Thank you to everyone who is joining us this evening for our virtual candidate forum. I'm Monica Hopkins, the Executive Director of the ACLU of the District of Columbia. We're hosting tonight's forum with an outstanding group of 14 other local organizations on criminal justice. And our criminal justice system has been in need of serious reform for several years. But the current public health crisis caused by coronavirus has exposed how dire the situation is. Our agencies lacked clear emergency protocols for how to deal with a pandemic, and those caught in the criminal legal system have suffered for it. Dozens have been needlessly sickened and some have died. Residents of wards 7 and 8 have been especially hard hit. We'll ask the candidates running for DC councils in wards 7 and 8 their views on the issues tonight. The first hour will be with ward 7, and then at 7 p.m. we'll welcome the ward 8 candidates. Candidates have been asked to speak slowly to facilitate the ASL and Spanish interpretation and closed captioning. If you need Spanish interpretation, please call the number on this slide. We also want to thank all of our co-sponsors shown here. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce Jenny Gaithright of WAMU, who has joined us tonight as the moderator. Jenny covers criminal justice, housing, and health, and was previously a producer for NPR One. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you, Monica. I'm going to start everybody with a few housekeeping notes, just how this is all going to work over Zoom. First thing for the audience, you are all on mute. Your cameras are not on, so you do not have to worry about that. This forum is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook and will be posted online afterwards in its entirety. We cannot answer your questions live, but if you do want to ask one, you can use the Q&A box, and I will be able to see those questions, as will the rest of the audience. And if you're in the audience, you can thumbs up certain questions that you especially think should be asked. If you have a question and you need translation, type it into the Q&A box and the translator will translate it. All candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions. There's a timekeeper on screen if you look in gallery view. If you speak after your time is called as up by me, you will be muted. Please mute yourself, everybody, when you're not speaking, but don't forget to unmute yourself before you speak. I am known to forget that myself. Without further ado, I just want to introduce all of our candidates. You can wave when I say your name. We have Kelvin Brown. We have Councilmember Vince Gray. We have Anthony Lorenzo Green. We have James Jennings. We have Rebecca Morris. And we have Vita Rashid. And I will start with an opening question that each one of you will answer, so I will call you. The question is, what is your definition of public safety? I will start with you, Kelvin Brown.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Kelvin Brown. I'm running for the Ward 7 council member seat. But before I answer, I would just like to take a moment just to pause to reflect on the lives that have been lost due to COVID-19. Thank you all very much. And so to answer the question, public safety to me means that we all live in an environment that's free of crime. We have the ability to go as we please throughout our community, enjoy the natural environments, enjoy ourselves when we get on transportation to go to work, where our seniors have opportunities to go and run their errands to grocery stores, to pick up prescriptions, but an environment free of crime that allows our neighbors to move about without fear of harm for their safety or safety of their families, and the whole community has an opportunity to thrive in place.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next up, I will ask the same question. What is your definition of public safety to Councilmember Gray? Councilmember, could you unmute yourself?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I appreciate the opportunity. I've lived in the District of Columbia all my life, and I've always wanted to be able to be in an environment where I felt safe, to be able to go about the community that I grew up in, the community that I live in now, and feel that my interests were going to be protected by those who are vested with the responsibility to do that, and to respect the issues that affect everybody else in our environment as well. So to me, it's somebody who will be there to protect my interests, somebody who will protect the opportunity for me to be able to interact with those who I live with and interact with those who I want to be around with and feel safe from not being subjected to harm.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next, I will ask the same question. What is your definition of public safety to Anthony Lorenzo Green? You have 1 minute.
Thank you for the question. Public safety to me is a community that you're able to walk down the street without any fear of being abused, harmed, or neglected in any way, whether that's from strangers and you may or may not know in your community, in your own home, or whether that's systems, oppressive systems that push through policies that cause even more oppression and more destruction in our neighborhoods. We have to get beyond the basic narrative of what we view as safety, which we always hear is either more police or more jails and cages. Safety is something that we have to reimagine as something that, as long as we invest in the resources that people need every day, that attack the root causes of violence, it reduces the amount of incidents that happen in our community that lead to it, whether it's housing or homelessness, or whether it's someone that's trying to get out of an abusive relationship. So that is what public safety to me is, when a community is able to live together in peace without fear of other individuals or oppressive systems.
Thank you. Next, I will ask the same question to Ms. Vida Rashid. What is your definition of public safety?
My definition of public safety is the freedom to move about within your community without the fear of retaliation, of hurt or harm. It's also the quiet enjoyment of your home, not having to worry about is a bullet going to come through your window, not worrying about is someone going to rob you while you're on the street. Public safety is everyone in the community working together to make sure that our communities are safe. That means being able to walk down the street, being able to send your kids to school without having to worry about whether they're going to be harmed, being able to go to the grocery store, just the basic needs. That's what I look at as public safety.
Thank you. Rebecca Morris.
Okay. Public safety to me is being able to walk around without the black cloud of violence that can attack you at any moment. It's a safe space for the people in the community to be able to live, to shop, for people who are mentally ill, to be able to have a safe space for them. And we can all just live together to live peacefully. That's the end of my question.
Thank you. Next, James Jennings, what is your definition of public safety?
My definition of public safety is all resources that's given the city to work together, the schools, the recreation centers, the neighbors. It's a partnership of the police and others. So until we get a thread to strengthen those things, we're going to always have crime. So I would like to see crimeless communities in our areas, but we first of all must have dignity of the neighbors, respecting each other, first of all, and our police. The police are supposed to be there to work with the community. And we need to strengthen that thread in all neighborhoods that's affected by these things.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. And I also wanted to just ask you, when you speak, to bring your mic as close as possible to you as you can.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to do an opening question, and sort of the way that this next phase is going to go is that some questions, not everybody will answer every question, so I'll call on about 3 people for each question, but then there will be certain questions that I will ask a hands raised response to, kind of like a rapid fire where everybody will respond, and then I might call on some of you to elaborate. So the first question is going to go to Rebecca Morris, and then James Jennings, and then Kelvin Brown. So this is about the racial disparities that we're seeing in the people, in the deaths from COVID-19. 80% of deaths resulting from COVID-19 are Black DC residents. Do you think there is a connection between the criminal justice system and public health? And if so, how would you address that?
I would say, we've always had, since the 60s, since prior to segregation, DC has always had an issue with disparities between races in Washington, DC. This is not something that's brand new. And when we lack hospitals, when we lack resources to be able to get correct food for our areas, when we lack health, when we lack education, these all play a part in the crime system. So yes, they do kind of go hand in hand. And in areas in which I live in, we currently have jump outs during the pandemic. So yes, they go hand in hand. And wherever there's a target, wherever there's lack of resources, especially in our Black areas, you're going to find that.
Thank you. Mr. Jennings?
Yes, I feel that we should model and do as other states to release those non-violent offenders and release them. You know, especially if the jails environments are not clean and livable, they shouldn't be there in those resources. If it's a health issue, which it is now, because as you hear more and more, the prisoners are being tested, the workers are being tested. So something is going on with that picture. And as you can go back in time with during Mayor Washington days, there was epidemics in the jails then too. So not as this widespread with Corona, but cleanliness and everything should be main focus.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Your time is up. Next, I will ask the same question to Kelvin Brown. Do you see connection between the criminal justice system and public health? And I'll give you 1 minute.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I absolutely see there is a connection between the criminal justice system and health. The intersectionality between racial disparities across Ward 7 and across DC has persisted for many years through many administrations. And anytime you have a population of people who have been underserved, marginalized, have lack of resources that are available to the community, whether it be jobs or access to quality health care, or just the basic essentials and necessities to live a great life and to thrive in place, you see a proliferation of crime. One of the things that we've seen from research is that the Washington Teachers Union put out a report that says there are over 20,000 vacancies in our education system in the district. Also, we know that crime, the offenders across DC ages range from 16 years old to 25 years old. So there's a direct correlation between the amount of resources, our educational systems, and its impact on the criminal justice system. And if we really want to get serious about crime and about slowing the homicide rate across the district, then we need to focus on healthcare, education, and make sure we have jobs for our youth.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is going to be a quick show of hands. So everybody, I'm going to ask everybody to respond to this question. And the question is, do you support ending the practice of stop and frisk by the Metropolitan Police Department? So raise your hand if you do support ending the practice of stop and frisk by MPD. Okay, it looks like Everybody's raising their hands. Does anybody not support that? Okay. Councilmember Gray, could you explain your position on this matter? And unmute, please.
How's that? Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Yeah, I have seen the abuse of stop and frisk in our communities, and to raise the question with some of our law enforcement officials about one, being able to ensure that there is no stop and frisk. We've seen that here, we've seen it in other places, and also the compliance with the NEAR Act, which I support heartily. It was approved before I came back to the council, and I've supported it heartily since I've been back to the council, and that is making sure that we comply with the provisions of the NEAR Act, which makes it clear that any allegations of stop and frisk would be complied with, and there would be data provided to the public. Certainly, like organizations like ACLU, to be able to know if there have been incidences where there have been accusations of stop and frisk. So, no, stop and frisk is absolutely.
Thank you, Councilmember. Sorry, your time is up. Could you elaborate on your position, Vida Rashid?
You were muted for most of the part. I didn't hear what you said.
Could you elaborate on your position?
I do not support stop and frisk. I don't believe that I believe that if you don't have a reasonable, articulable suspicion to stop someone, then you should not be stopping them and patting them down unless you believe that crime is afoot. I think that leads to individuals in their community being harassed and probably feeling intimidated. So I think that we need to do what's in the best interest of our communities and within the means of the law.
Thank you. The next question is, as the district faces an economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a risk that more DC residents will be pushed into poverty. Community leaders and violence interrupters worry that this could lead more young people towards crime because their basic needs will not be met. What would you want to do to address this as a council member? I'll start with you, Anthony Lorenzo Green. And please unmute.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and also want to add my name to stating that I've been someone that has been on the front lines to stop this racist tactic of stop and frisk in our communities. And it's a shame that 6th District Police has a high profile as being the leading police district that has been inflicting this in our communities in Ward 7. But when it comes to COVID-19, we do have to be very intentional when we start talking about reopening our government and being equitable. We have to be intentional about where we're investing our resources. For too long, we have been dealing with a huge battle with so much money being plowed into the pockets of developers instead of being plowed into the pockets of working people in the city. And we have many leaders who like to talk a good game about that. But one thing we have to be very intentional is follow the dollars and where it goes. As long as it's going to attacking housing issues, attacking our access to healthcare, attacking our employment issues, and it shouldn't take someone just having a job just to not be harassed on the streets. It should be a human right for anyone to be able to walk down their street and live in peace and be able to have a roof over their head.
Thank you. Next, I want to pose the same question to you, Councilmember Gray, about community leaders worried that young people will be pushed to crime if their needs are not met during this pandemic, and how you will respond to that.
Am I unmuted?
There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think we've got to make sure that we ensure that our children have educational opportunities available to them. And those opportunities, unfortunately, have been somewhat foreclosed during this pandemic that we've experienced. We've got our schools now that are going to close on May 29th. And how much will our children have lost in terms of the learning opportunities they should have experienced during this entire time? So we've got to make sure that there are full opportunities available to our children, as well as other people who need the kind of vocational opportunities, workforce development opportunities available to them as well. And that is really up to us as leaders to make sure that those doors are open to our children, to make sure they're open to our adults, to people who need to have opportunities available to them to be able to earn a dollar, which is what virtually everybody wants in the first place, to be able to earn a dollar.
Thank you. Next, I will ask the same question to Vida Rashid. What will you do to respond to this worry that unmet needs during this pandemic could lead young people to turn to crime?
Well, one of the things that I'm currently doing is I'm working with different populations in our underserved communities. So one of the things that I'm doing is making sure that people actually are eating during this time, because a lot of people don't have access to food because of the grocery gap in Ward 7. And sometimes because people are not employed and are not working, they don't have the money to get food. With our youth, some people are in apartments all day. They don't know what to do. So just making sure that they have the opportunity to come outside. But when we talk about a council member and what it is that we can do, I think making sure that we have resources in those communities so that when those individuals come out, they have what it is they need. Educational material. I have 2 children that I'm raising right now, so the digital divide, making sure that everyone has access to be able to go on the internet, to be able to come outside safely with a mask and gloves. So those are some of the things that I think that we should be doing, making sure that we have resources in the community. And when I think about resources, I think about having access to the internet. I think about gloves. I think about masks. I think about being able to come outside and making sure that we.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so my next question is, do you support reducing the presence of police officers in district public schools? If you do, why? And if you don't, why not? I will first ask Mr. Jennings. Mr. Jennings, you're muted. Could you unmute? You're still muted.
I support police being in the schools. And furthermore, I'd like to challenge all the candidates running for citywide positions, congressmen down to all the council members, to donate part of their salary, as I'm challenged them to donate 75% of their salaries to make a real difference in the city, citywide. If I'm elected, I will donate 75% of my salary citywide, so those issues will be addressed in every school citywide. Not only Ward 7, Ward 8, all the schools. Public schools always had a problem with violence. So we need to stamp that out and get serious and make a difference. All the public officials running for public office should donate 75% of their salary back to these issues, because
Thank you,
not
Mr.
waiting
Jennings.
on federal government to rescue us. We gotta give ourselves.
Thank you, Mr.
service.
Jennings. That's your time. I just wanted to come back to the question one time because people might not have heard the initial answer. Do you support reducing the presence of police officers in district public schools or not? Just quickly. I'm sorry, could you unmute and answer?
Who's that for?
That was from Mr. Jennings.
Oh, sorry.
I like to see more police.
More police. Okay, thank you. That was just what I wanted to make sure we heard. Thank you. Okay, so this question, the same question, do you support reducing the presence of police officers in district public schools? Yes or no, and why not? Goes to Ms. Morris.
I support decreasing the police officer presence, but increasing resources so that people do not have to resort to fighting and crime. Again, I believe that we should have more an expansive mental health versus where people can go in and do like peer mediation, where people can talk it out and learn how to talk out things earlier in, provide internships and let the students know their internships, provide higher chances of tutoring, basically more activities for students so that people aren't resorting to crime out of pure boredom, or people aren't resorting to crime because they don't have the tools that they need to discuss things. So we don't necessarily need the police officers, we need the resources.
Thank you. I want to ask the same question to Mr. Kelvin Brown. Do you support reducing the number of police officers in public schools? Yes or no, and why or why not?
Absolutely, great question. So being a former high school teacher and being in the actual classroom with students, I understand the need to make sure that our students are protected, that our teachers have the necessary resources to provide instruction to our students, and that our students are in an environment where they can excel. And so we should not militarize our schools, but in the event of a major disaster or a 9/11 attack or Columbine, we want to make sure that our schools are safe and that the necessary authorities are there to protect our greatest assets behind the buildings. And that begins with making sure that we're fully funding our schools. The schools have enough resources to provide the necessary instruction for our kids, whether it be vocational, in a traditional setting, and also make sure our parents have the necessary resources at home to provide and take care of their kids as well.
Thank you. This next question is going to be for a quick show of hands from everybody. And the question is, do you support the Second Look Amendment Act, which expands the opportunity to request resentencing for young adults who committed their offense between the ages of 18 and 25? So if you support this act, if you support this act, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like you are all in support of it. So I think I will just move on to the next question. Some members of the community ask for more police in the neighborhood in response to crime. Other residents say that having more police around makes them feel less safe. Do you think there should be more or fewer MPD officers patrolling the streets of Ward 7? The first person I'll ask this question of is Anthony Lorenzo Green. Please unmute.
I apologize. MPD has a $500 million budget. And a lot of times, and when I tell people it's upon us to listen to our own people when they speak, we hear people tell stories of being pulled over for traffic stops with 8 or 10 police officers at their car. But when we go into community meetings, we're being told that there's not enough police officers on various corners. Having more police on our corners is only moving the crime incidents from block to block. It's not investing in attacking the root causes of why these violent incidents happen in the first place. We're treating it as a Band-Aid approach to at least give this feeling or this impression that as long as we make people feel safe, we're doing something about the violence. But as many of us know that grew up in DC, and I'm a third generation Washingtonian, they would tell you, we lived through the 80s and the 90s and seen this firsthand, how more police in our communities has not stopped the flow of crime, it's increased it. It has caused more incidents of violent crimes to happen with police officers. So we have to address and attack the root causes of it.
The next person I will ask this question of is Ms. Vida Rashid.
Well, as a person that has had a front row seat to the criminal justice system in DC Superior Court in the criminal division, one of the things that I would say is that we know this isn't a problem that we can arrest our way out of. While we don't want to be over policed, we don't want to be patrolled and controlled, I think that we need community policing, and that means working and policing ourselves, because it's going to be instances when we do need MPD. As an ANC commissioner, I've strongly advocated for programs such as Cure the Streets, which I have in my community in Benning Ridge and Marshall Heights. And I think that that's important because we need to take a public health approach to it. I also believe that it's going to be instances where MPD is going to be working with us. So we do need to collect data and be more transparent about what is actually happening in our communities so that we can come to some type of solution.
Thank you. I just wanted to just get the quick answer to the question: more police, fewer police, or the same number of police, Ms. Rashid?
I think that it depends on the situation. Currently, I think we have a good amount of police. I I just think, what is it that they're going to be doing?
Thank you. Mr. Jennings, do you feel there should be more or fewer MPD officers patrolling the streets of Ward 7?
I feel there should be more police officers throughout the city, citywide, and especially at the Boys and Girls Clubs. They are very underfunded, and they should be funded fully so that our people wouldn't be on the streets. If they had more boys clubs, police and boys clubs in DC, to have those staff with police officers to deal with the kids and lead them the right way as a mentor. So they took a lot of things out of the police and boys club, such as wrestling, boxing, karate. Those things really strengthen the kids' mental capacities as well as making them more sociable inclined.
Thank you. Councilmember Gray, I also wanted to give you a chance to respond. You have introduced legislation to increase the size of the MPD force. Is this still your position? If you could unmute.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are. Thank you, Councilman.
No, and I think it depends substantially on, you know, listening to people and what they feel about their own communities. I held a summit when I first came back to the council within 30 days before I was sworn in. And that was one of the questions we raised. Do you feel there should be more police officers? And there were some people who felt we should have more, and there were some people who felt we didn't need more. One of the things I think is hugely important is for people to understand, the officers themselves to understand what the role and job is of a person who is a police officer. And what does community policing mean? I've had some officers in my office and talked to them about what is community policing. And I had some leadership folks in the police MPD who didn't even know what community policing was. So I then charged and I'm still waiting, the chief of police to explain to me exactly what kind of training our officers exposed to around community policing, because if that is a watchword for us, then we need to ensure that we have police officers who really are trained in what community policing is.
Thank you. And I just wanted to, again, since I've been doing this for everybody, just get your quick answer. More police, the same number of police, or fewer police? Councilmember Gray.
Well, mine would be, depends on who you're talking about. I don't think you can just give a blanket answer of more or less. I think it depends on, you know, who's saying that, what community are we talking about, and what kind of, you know, efforts we are making around community policing.
Thank you. The next question is, what measures would you support to protect trans women of color from violence? I want to first ask Kelvin Brown.
Sorry about that. Just had to unmute myself there. Working with technology can be tricky sometimes. So to answer your question about, I think we have to take a step back. I think we have to really assess the situation and understand exactly what our community needs are, and make sure that we have the right protections in place to protect all of our members throughout all of our communities within Ward 7. That includes trans women of color, that includes our returning citizens, that includes our seniors, our youth. We need to make sure that we have policies in place to protect the population of Ward 7. And I think a part of that protecting the population includes making sure that there are resources available from a behavioral health standpoint, that there are jobs available, that all of our neighbors have access to quality, affordable health care across Ward 7 and across the district. But most importantly, we need to make sure we take into consent and understanding the ideas and opinions of all of our neighbors and our populations.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I want to ask the same question to Rebecca Morris. What measures would you support to protect trans women of color from violence?
It's kind of a two-parted answer. One, I would love for there to be equal opportunity for trans women to have equal opportunity for jobs. A lot of times when trans women are looking for work, they often turned away, which leads them to doing sex work, which leads them to possibly getting murdered or having crime. So I think when it comes down to spirits for trans women, we need to have equal opportunity for jobs. Secondly, we have to change our culture and the way we look at trans people. Some men are interested in trans women, and in our culture, it's deemed it's looked down upon. And when they're found out or embarrassed, they tend to kill trans women. So we have to change our culture, and then also provide opportunities for trans women so that they don't have to jump to sex work if they don't want to.
Thank you. Hope Village is the district's largest halfway house, and it permanently closed its doors at the end of last month. Would you support a new halfway house in your ward, Ward 7? Why or why not? I will first ask Vida Rashid.
So I support returning citizens. I believe that they should have the opportunity to come back to their communities, but I will always listen to the constituents of Ward 7. And when you're talking about a halfway house, I will look to the constituents as what they would want in Ward 7, because that's who I would be elected to serve.
Thank you. Anthony Lorenzo Green, would you support a new halfway house in Ward 7? Why or why not? Gotta unmute.
My bad. Yes, I would support a halfway house in Ward 7, but it has to be a halfway house that's done, and I actually prefer to use the language of reentry housing. It has to be one that is done in collaboration with the community. It can't be just some entity coming to Ward 7 saying, we're going to drop this here. It has to be something that the community wants. And the community, we have to acknowledge that we have a lot of returning citizens that live in Ward 7 who want to be part of this conversation. So as long as we actually have a real community conversation around it, and whether a certain location in Ward 7 or maybe over in another ward, maybe Ward 2, is a better option, that's something that the community needs to have and talk about.
Thank you. James Jennings, would you support a halfway house in Ward 7? Why or why not?
Of course, I would support halfway houses, because those returning persons to our communities need resources. They need support. They need our leadership in the community to reach out to them and lead them through that process so they can be successful in attaining their goals. So without those community leaders' support and ridiculing halfway houses in our areas, we as Ward 7 or other wards guys support our returning citizens. We just can't just not support them and tell them where they can't live or whatnot. We got to open our arms and have them back into the community with full support. And we get better results when we extend our leadership in that direction, I feel.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. It's been almost 2 years since Daquan Young was shot and killed by an off-duty DC police officer. MPD has not disclosed any information about the officer, and Daquan Young's mother doesn't know the name of the man who shot him. Would you introduce or support legislation to force police to disclose in a timely manner after violent incidents the name of the officer involved, release body camera footage, and produce oversight by independent investigators? First, Councilmember Gray, I'll ask you that. Councilmember, could you unmute?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if just disclosing the name of the officer is going to serve a constructive purpose. I'd have to know what the purpose is for disclosing the name of the officer in the first place. And if there's a constructive purpose for that, yes, I would support it, but I don't support it just on its face. I believe that we should be working towards, again, how do we engage our police officers more in the District of Columbia, more in Ward 7? And it would be great if we had more officers who actually live in our communities. For example, the last data I saw, only 16% of our police officers actually live in the District of Columbia. The more our police officers live in the city, have legislation to actually support making that happen more easily. The more we do that, the more the offices will become an inherent part of our living environment every day. So we need to be working to try to do that. And my legislation, of course.
Thank you. Sorry, your time is up. Anthony Lorenzo Green, could you respond?
Yes, mothers deserve to know the names of individuals that killed their sons, period. There should be no way we're dancing around this of saying when we already do this as a natural course of doing business in this country, of releasing the names of folks who are accused of committing a crime or doing anything in our community. Just because you have a badge should not make you an exempt from anyone knowing who killed their sons. I live in Deanwood. Deanwood is the location of the headquarters of 6th District. I have 4 police officers that live right around my house, but we still see a high rate of violent incidents and a high rate of violent incidents being inflicted on community members. So yes, and I also want to highlight the death of Jeffrey Price. Just 2 days ago, actually yesterday, was the 2-year anniversary of his death. So I want to really push this, where we actually are being intentional and elevating the voices of everyone in our community, not just a select few. Every mother deserves to know the name of the person that killed their child, period.
Thank you. Calvin Brown, do you support putting in place legislation that would require timely disclosure, such as the name of the officer and the release of body camera footage?
Absolutely. And I think the key word there in the question is making sure that the information is released on a timely basis. Because if we are to actually grow together as a community, we have to work together with law enforcement to make sure that there's accountability, that there's transparency, and that our citizens and residents across Ward 7 can really count on MPD to be there in their time of need, but also to be there to be a staple and work with them throughout our communities. So absolutely, yes.
Thank you. The next question came from an audience member who submitted this in advance, and they asked, what would you do immediately to ensure the safety of my family member who is currently in the DC jail? I will ask this of Vita Rashid first.
I think what we're doing now, currently, we have the CJA attorneys, the Criminal Justice Act attorneys, we have the Public Defender Service along with ACLU actually filing writs to have defendants released that have low-level crimes. I think it depends on what the crime is. Is it a violent offense? Are they in there are they being accused of murder? It just depends on the situation, and we need more facts.
Thank you. James Jennings, I'll pose this question to you next.
Can you repeat the question, ma'am?
The question came from an audience member who submitted this in advance, and they asked, what would you do immediately to ensure the safety of my family member who is currently in the DC jail?
Well, as I spoke earlier about those persons that's in our facilities, we should do everything in our power to release them if they non-violent offenders, if they have less time to serve than a year or so, we should release them to communities with probation or home arrest. We have other options to just leave them in there to be exposed to unsafe environments.
Thank you.
So I will work diligently to make sure that happens. Now, city officials should make that happen now too, since we have this epidemic going on.
Thank you. Rebecca Morris, how would you answer this question about what you would do immediately to ensure the safety of this person's family member who is currently in the DC jail?
I kind of agree with Ms. Rashid. It's hard to tell what exactly he did to ensure. So if he's there for a violent crime, you kind of have to stay in jail. If it's something a little bit more petty, it's a possibility where we should think of, if it's something light on a lightweight note where it's theft, where we could think of reentry right back into society. So it just all depends on on what's happening. And I think that there are a lot of organizations that's currently trying to help with people who have misdemeanors or who are in jail for low-level crimes to bring them home. So it just depends.
Thank you. The next question is about immigration enforcement. A lot of immigration enforcement in DC happens through its criminal justice system's collaboration with ICE, either arrests at the DC jail, courts that transfer people. Do you think DC should end its collaboration with ICE in enforcement? And if so, how would you accomplish that? I will first ask Councilmember Gray.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Well, first of all, one of the things I did as mayor of the District of Columbia was to declare the city to be a sanctuary city. And essentially what that does is to not have us enforcing federal laws, that if the federal government has an issue that they are focused on, they can do that themselves. We're not enforcing their laws, and that's been sustained. Second of all, I think it's absolutely important that we recognize that there are people in our city who are trying to live a safe and a decent life in the District of Columbia. We in terms of healthcare, for example, we're working now to make sure that people who are immigrants in the District of Columbia have an opportunity to be able to access the Alliance program, which is a program for people who are immigrants in the.
Thank you, Councilmember. Your time is up. I just wanted to circle back to the question: do you think DC should end its collaboration with ICE or not?
Well, I think we should end our collaboration. I think we should just make sure we are sustained as a sanctuary city, which will have us not implementing any federal laws in the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Kelvin Brown, I'll pose the question to you.
Absolutely. I totally believe that DC should not cooperate with federal authorities to provide data on our immigrant population, our immigrant neighbors. And that means no data, that means no cooperation or no collaboration. As a city, we have the obligation to protect and serve and provide the necessary resources for all of our populations, regardless of their immigration status.
Thank you. This next question is the last question before our final statements. It came from an audience member who asked, what short-term and long-term policies will you advocate for that reduce violent crimes and drug-related crimes in Ward 7? Ms. Vida Rashid.
So as an ANC commissioner, one of the things that I strongly advocated was taking a public health approach to violence. I successfully advocated for money in our budget for our Cure the Streets program, which is currently operating. And also I'm a proponent of the NEAR Act. In addition, I would support rehabilitation programs and also diversion in the courts. But I also think that we need to take some preventative measures to ensure that people have what it is they need. So as a council member, having oversight and accountability, right? Working with social services agencies to make sure that people have the things that they need so that crime will not happen or that we can at least deter it. Also encouraging individuals to become a part of the police force, community policing, seeing people that I grew up with on the police force, or people from our community.
Thank you. Anthony Lorenzo Green.
Thank you. Well, the short-term goal is to advocate for full funding and full implementation of the NEAR Act, which has been a big battle over the last few years. And the NEAR Act basically forces the city to address violent crime as a public health crisis. We know even with the violence interruption program, and there's two, one with the mayor's office and one with the attorney general's office, we actually had to go down to the council and force the council, including Councilmember Gray, to put more funding in that and push back on some of the politics about whether the violence interrupters were needed in our community and whether that money should be transferred over to the police department. And like I want to mention again that we have a police department with a $500 million budget. So our long-term goal is really to assess whether that money is being used effectively, which we know it is not, and redivert some of that money into some of the issues that can reduce a lot of the violent crime, like housing, like getting access to healthcare, like getting employment opportunities, like actually investing in some of the issues that would reduce domestic violence at our homes, because we know we can't put a police officer on every corner. We definitely can't put a police officer in every living room.
Thank you. Now our time is running out, so we're going to do 1-minute closing statements for each candidate. Why are you the best candidate to represent Ward 7 on criminal justice issues? Rebecca Morris.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. My job is, I'm currently a server, and when you work in a restaurant, a lot of your coworkers are they're reentry citizens. And I talk with them daily, and I talk to people. My neighbors are reentry. Some of my family members are reentry. And when you have firsthand accounts, they will tell you all the things that they need that would prevent them from even jumping into a crime to begin with. And I think these things are important when you're into the community, and when you're talking to people who are direct. You're not talking from a standpoint of just looking from a statistics on a piece of paper. When we're talking about criminals, these people, I have a name to a criminal face, whether it's somebody who's a murder charge, whether it's somebody who has theft, from them all ranges. And some people who grew up in great homes, some people who grow up in poor homes. I can put a face to it, and I'm able to help them by literally talking to them directly.
Thank you. James Jennings.
I'd like to see more reform, real reform, and money allocated for those returned citizens to our communities. Without full funding, it's no success. So as a council member, I will fight hard to make sure funding and the fair share is given to Ward 7. All the citizens of Ward 7, not some, all.
Thank you. Vita Rashid.
I am the best candidate because I'm the only candidate with a decade of experience to have a front row seat in the criminal justice system. I'm also an attorney. I work in the Attorney General's office. One of the things that I did there was go out in the community and talk to people about different issues, because all of our issues do not need to be where we have to lock someone up. I've also, as an attorney, one of the things that I know is the law and how it works. I know what we need to do, and I know how to get it done, and I'm able to go in there day one and get the job done.
Thank you. Councilmember Gray.
Well, first of all, let me make sure, am I unmuted?
You are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think it's important that you know what people want. And that's exactly what I've spent the time, my career doing. I've been the mayor of the District of Columbia, I've been the council chair, and I've been the Ward 7, and I am again. And I think you can look at the work that I did to be able to assemble what people wanted, and I've gone about the business of trying to help make that happen. First of all, being able to make sure we have a healthcare system in place, which is exactly what we're working on at this stage. Secondly, to make sure we have a first-class education system, because so many of our children wind up in difficult circumstances because they don't have their educational needs that have left them in a place to be able to do well. I have been a great proponent of early childhood education, which I think helps to get parents to a different place and get our kids to a different place by being able to be ready for a first-class kindergarten education. And I would simply, I want to underscore making sure we have worked to have our children and have our students, have our adults in the District of Columbia be able to know,
Thank you.
have the educational patients.
Thank you. Anthony Lorenzo Green, your closing statement. Why are you the best candidate to represent Ward 7 on criminal justice?
Thank you. Again, my name is Anthony Lorenzo Green. I'm a third-generation Washingtonian, born and raised right here in the Deanwood community in Ward 7. And I believe I'm the best candidate to attack criminal justice reform is because over the last decade, I've been on the front lines as a social justice lawyer to attack a lot of the root causes of violence, trying to bring more accountability to our police department, showing up when people really need us down at the Wilson building, and even standing on our corners or sitting on various blocks with our own people to listen to our people speak their truth. A lot of times that we've noticed over the years, we have so many people who've just been waiting for leadership to actually open their ears, step out of the Wilson building, step out of these community rooms, and actually get down into the nooks and crannies of all of our neighborhoods. Just 2 years ago, we had an historic hearing on policing right here in Deanwood, policing in Ward 7 and 8, and it's because people from Ward 7 stepped up and spoke out about what was happening to them in their communities. Children were stepping out their doors, heads on a swivel, trying to figure out, am I going to be safe when someone walking down the street, or am I going to be safe from a police officer who wants to harass me because of the color of my skin? So we have to be pushing community policing and expand the powers of the DC Police Office of Complaints.
Thank you. Calvin Brown, your closing statement.
Yes, thank you. I believe that I'm the best candidate to represent my neighbors across Ward 7 on the DC Council as a Ward 7 council member, because I understand that we have to have a comprehensive approach to ensuring that Ward 7 reaches its brighter days, which are in its future and which are tomorrow. We need to have to take a comprehensive approach to making sure that there are jobs available for not only our youth, but for our seniors and for our neighbors who want to be retrained and go into another skill. We need to make sure that there's affordable housing that's available for all residents across Ward 7, that we're able to move them from the continuum from homelessness to tenants to home ownership. We need to make sure from an education standpoint that we fully fund our schools and that we have vocational programs that are currently in place to help our students navigate educational systems so they can live positive lives, thrive in place here in Ward 7. And also from a public safety standpoint, we need to make sure that the officers that are patrolling our communities, they are from DC, not Philadelphia, not New Jersey, not Delaware. They are from Ward 7. And as a council member, I'll make sure those things happen.
Thank you all. That concludes our Ward 7 forum for tonight. Now we're going to take a brief break to switch over to our Ward 8 candidates. And in the meantime, please watch this short video about how you can request your absentee ballot for the election.
Hello, I'm Larry Bryant, Community Engagement Manager with the ACLU of DC, and I'm here to share with district residents information from the DC Board of Elections on how to request your absentee or mail-in ballot for the June 2nd primary election and the special election for Ward 2 council member on June 16th. Beginning May 22nd through June 2nd, which is primary election day, 20 voting centers will be open across the district to provide voters with same-day registration to vote, update voter registration, vote in person, and you can submit ballots received by mail. However, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the DC Board of Elections has ramped up access to absentee and mail-in voting so that we all can vote safely and securely. What's at stake locally this June are several important local DC races. First, on June 2nd, residents in Wards 2, 4, 7, and 8 will vote for council member. In addition, on June 16th, Ward 2 residents will participate in a special election for the seat vacated by former council member Jack Evans. Lastly, DC residents will vote for an at-large member to the council. Federal races in the primary include shadow representative and senator, delegate to the House of Representatives, and the Democratic presidential primary. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you are registered to vote. The Vote for DC website, see listed here, is www.votefordc.com, includes step-by-step instructions on how to register to vote and how to request an absentee ballot. Now, the process to request your absentee or mail-in ballot includes 3 options: the paper form, the mobile app, and a direct route through the DC Board of Elections web portal. In the paper form option seen here, simply complete the fillable form available on the DC Board of Elections website, making sure to check all of the boxes applicable to you and indicate the specific 2020 elections for which you are requesting a ballot. Remember, if you are a Ward 2 resident, you have the option to receive an absentee ballot for the June 16th special election. There is also a single box you can check to receive an absentee or mail-in ballot for all the elections held during 2020 election cycle in the district. After filling out the form there are 3 ways you can return the completed form to the DC Board of Elections. First, you can print, sign, and scan the completed form, and then email it to dcabsentee@dcboe.org. If you are unable to print or scan the form at home, save the completed document as a PDF and email it again to dcabsentee@dcboe.org. Either way, you should receive an email from the DC Board of Elections confirming that they have received your completed request. You can also track your status of the absentee ballot on the DCBOE website. Your third option, if you do have access to a printer, is to print and mail the completed form directly to the DC Board of Elections office. The address is here on the slide. Regardless of how you send it, it is very important to remember that you sign your completed request for it to be valid. Another way to complete your absentee mail-in ballot request form is to download the Vote for DC app, available for Apple and Android devices. Once you've downloaded the app, just follow the instructions to complete the form, including signing using your finger or stylus before clicking to submit. Lastly, but not least, be aware of these important dates for registration deadlines. May 12th is a deadline for online voter registration, and May 26th is the deadline for requesting a mail-in ballot. Finally, if you have any questions about the absentee or mail-in ballot process, here's the contact information for the DC Board of Elections, and tell them ACLU DC sent you. Thank you all. I'm Larry Bryant, and I'll see you next time.
Welcome everyone who is joining us at this time. We just completed the Ward 7 candidate forum, and now we are beginning the Ward 8 candidate forum. I am Monica Hopkins, the Executive Director of the ACLU of the District of Columbia. We're hosting tonight's forum with an outstanding group of 14 other local organizations. Our criminal justice system has been in need of serious reform for several years, but the current public health crisis caused by the coronavirus has exposed how dire the situation is. Our agencies lacked a clear emergency protocol for how to deal with the pandemic, and those caught in the criminal legal system have suffered for it. Dozens have been needlessly sickened, and some have died. Residents of Wards 7 and 8 have been especially hard hit. We've already asked the candidates running for DC Council in Ward 7 questions, and now we will ask candidates in Ward 8 their views on these issues tonight. Candidates have been asked to speak slowly to facilitate the ASL and Spanish interpretation and closed captioning. If you need Spanish interpretation, please call the number on this slide. Thank you to the co-sponsors who are shown here. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce Jenny Gaithright of WAMU, who has joined us tonight as the moderator. Jenny covers criminal justice, housing, and health, and was previously a co-producer for NPR One. Welcome once again, Jenny.
Thank you, Monica. I will start with just a few housekeeping notes so we know what's happening here. First, for the audience, all audience members are on mute. Your cameras are not on, so you don't have to worry about that. This forum is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook, and it will be posted online afterwards. We can't answer your questions live, but if you are a member of the audience and you would like to ask a question, use the Q&A box in Zoom, and the rest of the audience will be able to see those, and I will be able to see those. And if you're in the audience, you can vote on those questions using a thumbs up, and then I will select which questions will be asked. If you have a question and you need it to be translated, type it into the Q&A box and the translator will translate it. All candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions. There's a timekeeper on screen that you can watch to track where you are. And if you do continue to speak after your time is up, then you're going to be muted. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking, but don't forget, I'm known to do this, don't forget to unmute yourself when it's time for you to speak. So with that, I will introduce candidates. You can do a brief wave, and then we'll start with opening statements. First, we have Stuart Anderson. If you could give a wave. We have Mike Austin. Welcome. We have Yeida Ford. Welcome. And we have Councilmember Trayon White. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm going to start with a question that you will all answer, and that's an opening question. You'll have 1 minute, and the question is pretty simple. It's, what is your definition of public safety? We'll start with you, Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. I want to thank the ACLU for the work you all been doing in nations across in this nation for years. I've been working with you all going back to Johnny Bonds. So I want to thank you all for your work you're doing in the community. I also want to say that my definition of public safety is a community in which that's walkable and livable, in which people don't have to worry about gun violence or being victims of gun violence and active violence in the community. And it's done through a community-led approach, through a public safety approach, not just policing and heavy policing in our community. And so I've sought to do that during my time, which I'll speak to later on in the discussion.
Thank you. Next, Mike Austin, what is your definition of public safety?
I also want to thank the ACLU for all the great work you all have done across the country in protecting our liberties and making sure that we hold a lot of these government agencies accountable through your lawsuits. Public safety, especially in a community like Ward 8, is vital. And it means, a community where we feel safer, and not just with a strong police presence, but that community members actually feel safe. So that does involve, some police presence. They do play a role in our public safety overall. But the most important piece is having this new approach with, public health focus, ensuring that our residents have the services they need, so that we're providing adequate services for returning citizens, and that we're reducing our violent crime as much as we possibly can, but ultimately so that everybody can feel and enjoy their communities a lot more.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. Yeida Ford, what is your definition of public safety? Could you unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
There you go. Perfect.
Yes, thank you, Jenny, and thank you, ACLU, and all the partners for this important conversation tonight. So, Jenny, I think that it's simple. It's about quality of life. That's what public safety is about. It's about, Black men who can work a sustainable job, regardless of their criminal past. It's about not being afraid of the police in your community. It's about recruiting police who come from the community that they are policing to establish better collaboration. But it's also about, policing in a way that shows that you're not afraid of the community that you're policing, which leads to some of the violent interactions that we've seen here in Ward 8. Riding the bus and using public transportation without fear of a violent encounter or a fight breaking out while you're on the bus or on the train. Walking kids to school without seeing bloodstains in the street, access to healthy food and some of the social determinants of health that we have lacked here in Ward 8 for so long. So it generally boils down to a quality of life in those areas.
Thank you. Stuart Anderson, what is your definition of public safety?
Again, I would also like to thank everybody who was responsible for bringing this forum together. I think it's a wonderful idea, public safety. Public safety is about, as everyone else has said, it's about community involvement with policing, but public safety is much, much more. It's about a sense of safety and security. It's about an individual's sense of well-being. It's about all of the things that help us have an ease of mind, a better sense. Public safety is all about everyone feeling as if they are taking part in the process and feeling at ease no matter what time of the night, and doing the various different things that people enjoy, whether it's going to the park or going to a store or coming home from work. So public safety is about encompassing all of these venues and making sure that we are all working together in line to ensure each other's safety.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. This next question will go to all of you as well, and it is, how would you grade the DC jail's response to the coronavirus, and what steps would you take to address it immediately? Yaida Ford.
Yeah, so the DC jail's response to the coronavirus was definitely atrocious. I would like to say they did the best they could with what they had, but we know that that's not the case. I mean, there were stories about managers at the jail hoarding Lysol wipes, inmates still being allowed to clean, and not having the proper cleaning services in place, corrections officers not having PPE. So, I think that to grade them, it would definitely be an F. I mean, we certainly failed on that level. I think since then, certain controls have been put in place thanks to advocacy on behalf of several groups like the FOP and Black Lives Matter and DC and several advocacy organizations. So I think that we are getting there. And I have clients housed in the jail, so I know about the conditions, and inmates are still afraid, but things are better. I mean, I haven't gotten any calls this week. Last week I was still getting calls, but this week it seems to be a little bit better in that there are measures in place, but I think that we just didn't respond quickly enough. And unfortunately, and also the effort to decarcerate some of those.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mike Austin, how would you grade the DC jail's response to the coronavirus, and what steps would you take to address it immediately?
I would grade it an F, right? I think that the reality of the conditions at DC jail were that prior to Corona, the jail had deplorable conditions. And so the response, I think, just mirrored the conditions that already existed, and that the residents were already, or the inmates rather, were already living with those poor conditions. And so, I've been hearing from a lot of residents, even one today, about how they're, still not being, properly isolated. They don't have the proper equipment that they need. And it's continuing to spread throughout the facility. And so I would definitely give it an F. But further, I would say that to respond, the council needs to take swift action to ensure that this doesn't happen again, and that we're really working with Councilmember Allen and have strong oversight over the DC jail and, the deputy mayor for public safety to ensure that this does not happen again, or if there is another pandemic or any other situation that may come up in the near future. So I think, we've learned lessons here, and now we need to be ready for the next one.
Thank you. Stuart Anderson.
First and foremost, I want to commend all the workers who work at the jail. I want to commend all the people who took action. As probably the only candidate to speak on this platform who has spent any significant amount of time incarcerated in the jail and other places, I know how hard it is to try to quarantine people in a situation that none of us has ever seen before. And so my rating for them would be a D+. And the reason for that is that unique experience that I have, and understanding that unless we're going to release people, which is one of the things that we should be looking at doing, is releasing those nonviolent individuals. And they're working on a program before that, and I commend them for that as well. But we could just automatically do that, not knowing whether the virus was already in the jail or not. So the first protocol was to find out what was happening inside. And so I gave him a D+ for it because we've never been here before.
Thank you. Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. I would have to give the condition of DC jail an F, partly because I'm probably one of the only sitting council members that have been over the jail during this pandemic. As you all may know, I've been there 3 times. I just visited last week, and it's not a place that human beings to dwell in. Constantly getting calls, emails, Instagram messages. I'm up to about 67 messages from family members related to those who are incarcerated at the DC jail. I spend a lot of time on the phone with Director Booth. In fact, me and Kareem McCraney from the CIC visited the jail the last time. I was joined this time by some of the people from DYRS who now oversee the jail. From the conditions being that they're actually using dirty washcloths to clean the material, to clean the the jail to people being put in cells that was just contaminated by somebody else who contracted the virus. We were up to about 130 people who tested positive for the virus. And this could have been prevented early on when I started my advocacy and my emails to the mayor's office, Deputy Mayor Donahue, and also the leaders at the jail. And so I've been on this since the GC jail whole epidemic. And so I continue to work on this. The candidate that's been active on the front line doing work.
Thank you. Sorry, we had to mute you. So the next question is, do you support the creation of a new jail in DC? Why or why not? And what would you like to see come out of the process to replace the current DC jail? Mike Austin.
Yes, I do support the creation of a new jail, one that can provide the services that our residents need as they re-enter into the community, or while they're being housed before they are sent off to prison. So yes, we need a new jail. I think the DC jail's outlived its use, and so absolutely, I think that we need to build one, and it's important for us as a city, but that's transitioning towards a state that we're able to house our prisoners. So absolutely, yes, I would say that one that has suitable conditions, livable conditions, as our people are housed there, that are inhumane as they've been in the past, with lack of running water, insufficient lighting, piping, all kind of concerns that have come out prior to COVID, and all the complaints that I've heard for a very long time. And so absolutely, we need to be able to house our people. Thank you.
Councilmember Trayon White, do you support the creation of a new DC jail? Why or why not? And what would you like to see come out of the process to replace the current DC jail? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that we need to see happen, I think that the current DC jail is a functional obsolescence. I mean, it's past its useful life. One of the issues that we hear often from the inmates there is that it's not enough space to do programming. We are confined to certain spaces inside the chapel, in certain corners and crevices, just to communicate and allow the inmates there to get programming, access to education, and also wraparound services. And so, yes, I support a new jail, and I also think that we have a lot of room to create more programming and more advocacy and more interest for the attorneys to visit them. I just need to be a complete overhaul when it comes to DC jail, because what I'm seeing there on a regular basis is inhumane for our residents to live.
Thank you. This next question you will all respond to, but it's just by a quick show of hands. So the question is, in cooperation with Maryland and Virginia, would you support the creation of a civilian oversight board of Metro Transit Police? Raise your hand if the answer is yes, you would support the creation of a civilian oversight board. Okay, thank you. Raise your hand if you say no. Okay, I'm going to ask Yeida Ford and Stuart Anderson both, because I didn't see either of you raise your hands. Stuart Anderson, can you explain your response?
I was actually typing a message to you. You missed me on the last question. My response is yes, I raised mine first.
Okay, on the civilian oversight board?
Civilian oversight of Metro, yes, definitely we should have that. And then once you finish, I would like to answer the last question.
Oh, so actually not everybody is going to answer every question.
Okay, oh, fine, yeah. That's right. Fine.
Yeah. Yeida Ford, I didn't see you you raise your hand. Could you explain your response to the Civilian Oversight Board?
Yeah, I actually did raise my hand. I've been an advocate for that for the last 18 months, so I did raise my hand.
Okay, so it looks like we all agree on it. Stuart Anderson, could you explain why you support that?
Yes. So basically, I support the oversight because I believe that every one of our agencies, no matter what it is, whether it's housing, whether it's the jail, whether it's any other entity that is involved with interaction with the residents of our city, and specifically, definitely when we're trying to move about through transits, we need people there who are protecting us. And sometimes, and we've seen videos and things of that nature where we've seen overzealous Metro officers as well as other officers be engaged in activities that, should not be condoned. So definitely that's a reason why we have to have civilian oversight over every entity that interacts with the public in any manner whatsoever, so that they can feel, so that they won't feel that they can just do whatever it is that they want to do in the capacity of performing their jobs.
Thank you. The next question is also going to be kind of a rapid fire, quick show of hands, and I'll try to be better about noticing who's raised their hand this time. The question is, would you support legislation requiring district agencies to disclose and obtain approval from the DC Council for any surveillance technology they acquire or use to surveil district residents? Raise your hand if yes, you support this. Okay, so all of you, I'm seeing support. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question there since you are all in agreement. My next question is, some community members ask for more police in the neighborhood in response to crime, while other residents say having more police around makes them feel less safe. Do you think there should be more or fewer MPD officers patrolling the streets of Ward 8? I will ask first, Ms. Ford.
Yes, thank you. I think that more or fewer officers, like the number of officers, is important, but it won't curb the crime. We definitely need a community-based model where people are able to say, this is what makes me feel safe in my communities. All of our communities in Ward 8 are not monolithic, and there are different public safety needs and public safety concerns. I've heard some residents say, listen, we see the police a little bit too much. In fact, they're targeting the wrong people. And these are, professional African-Americans. And I hear other residents saying, I don't see the police at all. And so I think that we definitely need a community-based approach that involves the residents speaking to what they need it to see in their communities for them to feel safe. Before I would support any legislation to increase police presence, I would look at workforce development and other things that would actually get to the root issues of crime and why people are committing crime, because a lot of our crime in Ward 8 is poverty induced. So that's my position on that.
Thank you. Mike Austin, do you think there should be more or fewer MPD officers patrolling the streets of Ward 8?
I think the issue, or before we start, the district, we're among the most policed in the United States. That's a fact. And so I'm not sure if it's about having more police officers, but definitely having maximizing the presence that they already have. Studies have shown that more police officers lead to more adverse police interactions with the community. And while a lot of residents feel safer with more police, we should definitely ensure that the officers that we have now are doing more, which ensures getting out of their cars, they're connecting with the community, doing more to talk to our residents as they're out and about, so we can have more of the officer friendly, but really to address the underlying issue I think is most important, which stems from poverty, and to really double down on our efforts to address the economic insecurities that we face in our community. That's the best approach to reducing our violent crime.
Thank you. Okay, this next question you will all get an opportunity to answer. And it is, do you support the Community Safety and Health Amendment Act of 2019, which would decriminalize sex work among adults in the district and create a task force to study the effects of the law and make further recommendations? Why or why not? I'll start with you, Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. No, I do not support that bill. In talking to a lot of, in fact, I was in a conversation with Ms. Ruby from Casa Ruby, who was a former sex worker yesterday, and she was explaining to me her reasons. And so I listened to the community, both parts, and I think that we have a lot to iron out before we open up the floodgates to decriminalize sex work in the district, because we have to put some mechanism in place. Far too many times I'm saying messages about young Black girls being missing in the city, being exploited, being sexually assaulted. And so we have a number of things to tackle before we open up the floodgates to decriminalizing sex work in the District of Columbia. So no, I don't support it at this time.
Thank you. Next, I will ask Stuart Anderson for your response.
This is a difficult question for me. And so, like the last response, basically, I've been talking to people to get a better grasp on whether individuals who are involved in that specific line of activity, if they believe by doing that, by decriminalizing it, it would make them feel safer, because this is about public safety, I'm told. And so most of the people that I've talked to have said they're not sure about whether that's going to make them feel safe or not. And so I am at a conundrum. I want to do more. I want to do more studying. I want to talk to more people. Why get on one side or the other? I'm not saying that I would not do it. I'm saying that I don't have enough support from people who are actively involved in it, who says, hey, and I don't know how many people I need to talk to before I'm one way or the other. I just need to have a compelling argument for or against, and I haven't heard either.
Thank you. Ms. Yaida Ford, do you support this law or not? Why or why not?
Yeah, I would echo that it is controversial. I mean, for me personally, I've dealt with trafficking personally. I've represented clients, transgender women particularly, who have dealt with violence. And really the struggle has been, they just can't find stable employment. So for me, the approach to this would be, addressing discrimination in the workplace for our transgender women. I've also got family members who have been subject to trafficking, and in Ward 8, it's just a huge issue with the number of girls that are just missing. And so, with certain controls in place, I know that there is a sentiment that if we decriminalize it, more people would report trafficking, and people would feel better about reporting the sex trafficking that they see if they won't be penalized. And I'm hearing all of that, but certainly, I want to see certain things set in place so that if sex work ultimately is decriminalized in the District of Columbia, we need to make sure that human trafficking is dealt with, and that we have MPD's input and the input of the community to make sure that we're actually addressing trafficking and eradicating it entirely.
Thank you. Mike Austin.
The intent and the spirit of the bill, I fully understand. Sex work is one of the oldest professions to man, unfortunately, and it will continue to exist. And I think if we want to address sex work wholeheartedly, we have to explore it more. Now, I will say unequivocally, I do not support pimping or brothel owning being decriminalized in any fashion or form. It's far too egregious, and that's a violent aspect of sex work. But the overall intent of the bill, I get it, and it makes sense. And I mean, there are arguments on both sides. Literally, at my campaign office, First and Atlantic Street, I see it all the time, right? That is a hot spot, right? And we have hubs throughout Ward 8 where sex work is prevalent. And I don't want to conflate this with sex trafficking by any means, but, legalized sex work, if it is, controlled and regulated, I think there's room to explore. But
that's it. So I will just ask just quickly for a raise of hands now. If you had to vote on this bill today, raise your hand if you would vote for it. Raise your hand if you would vote against it. And raise your hand if you would abstain. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, I was muted. The next question I have is, almost 1/3 of people experiencing homelessness in DC say being previously incarcerated played a role in their struggle for housing. What will you do to address both the immediate need and the long-term need of housing for returning citizens? I will start with you, Stuart Anderson.
Thank you for that question. So one of the very first things I want to do is I want to look at we're getting ready to reauthorize the rent control piece, and I want to put some provisions in there that will support housing, increased housing. There's discrimination against people who have been incarcerated, and we need to remove anything that creates a barrier for people who are coming home from being able to find suitable housing. So one of the very first things that we want to do is we're going to look at that. We're going to look at rapid housing. We're going to look at every avenue that we can look at to make this transition more smoother for people coming home, and specifically those who come home who don't have family members to absorb them when they get released. So those are some of the things that I'll be looking at once I become council member.
Thank you. Mike Austin, what would you do to address both the immediate and long-term need of housing for returning citizens?
First, I mean, I think it's, ensuring that we have an appropriate halfway house in the District of Columbia, one that can help transition our residents out of their incarceration and back into, back home. Next, I would say really, I mean, this is really a housing issue. One is to, set aside some housing for our returning citizens so that when they have the wraparound support during a transition, that they're prepared to enter the workforce, but also we have housing that is set aside for them, even on a temporary basis, after their, the halfway house stay. Next, I would say it's imperative us to double down on our housing production trust fund. We have $100 million and still don't have enough housing being built at this time. And so the council needs to move a lot quickly to use that $100 million, if not more, to govern that a little better, to ensure that we have more housing to house our residents. Finally, I would say all these abandoned buildings can really be used to house and rehabilitate.
Thank you. The next question will go to all of you. What is your plan to protect members of the LGBTQ community from violence, particularly Black trans women? This came from an audience member who submitted it earlier today. I'll start with you, Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. So I've been, as a council member, I've introduced bills like Easter River High-Risk Displacement Prevention Services Fund Amendment Act of 2019, Eviction with Dignity Act of 2018, and I've been working closely with organizations like Casa Ruby that's in our ward, the other partners like Union Temple Baptist Church, Smile, to ensure we have housing for LGBTQ and specifically transgender individuals in our community. I was standing on the front line doing that. Like I said, I had a conversation with Ruby from Casa Ruby yesterday to expand those services east of the Anacostia River, so I continue to do that work as the council member Ward 8.
Thank you. Yaida Ford. Could you unmute?
Yeah, so I think, increasing penalties and doing sentencing enhancements for perpetrators of violence against transgender women. I mean, short of, the theory that, if we decriminalize sex work, it'll decrease violence. I think we need to deal with the perpetrators, and I think we need to definitely increase penalties, criminal penalties, and sentencing enhancements for those who would perpetrate an act of violence against a transgender woman.
Thank you. Mike Austin.
The unfortunate reality for Ward 8 is that we don't have we don't have a real voice for our LGBTQ issues right now, and so I'm going to be very focused on our LGBTQ community, and I'll be proud to create the first Ward 8 LGBTQ task force that'll be led by our LGBTQ residents, heavy with our trans residents, because their voice is necessary in these conversations. It will shape my policies as council member. It'll shape the direction of the ward, because trans issues, LGBTQ issues are Ward 8 issues. And we have to realize that we have a strong and heavy population of trans residents and LGBTQ residents as a whole in Ward 8. So I will create the task force and listen to their voices for the next 4 years.
Thank you. And next, Stuart Anderson, what is your plan to protect members of the LGBTQ community from violence, particularly Black trans women?
And so, like some of the others, I've been active in working with the LGBTQ community. We have to first develop something in the ward. That's something that we don't have. We don't have something in the ward for them. And so that's what we would have to look at. What is it that we're having? We have a lot of things in Northwest, a lot of avenues, a lot of pockets where transgenders can go and get aid and assistance, where they kind of look out for one another. We have to create that kind of atmosphere on this side of the Anacostia, and I would be working along with all those who are concerned to bring those types of services, to create those services where they are not, so that we could address all of those human rights violations that are inflicted upon members of the LGBT community, and specifically trans women. We have to encourage more safety for them.
Thank you for that. Most immigration enforcement in DC happens through its criminal justice system's collaboration with ICE. Do you think DC should end ICE collaboration and enforcement? And if so, how would you accomplish that? Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. Under this administration, we've seen a breakdown in communication between ICE and our local police enforcement. I know that I work very closely with Claudia on my team, who is Hispanic and pretty much uses her platform through my office to advocate for those who've been discriminated against for ICE. I think that we do need to cut our ties with ICE because we know under this current president's administration that there has been some unjust laws being placed, and people are, being disenfranchised from here to the borders as a result of these racist tactics to send people back, as they say, during this administration. So we've been, even in this emergency budget cycle, I've been advocating for residents, Hispanic speaking residents in the district to have an active voice in the budget and on the DC City Council. And so we want to fight against what they're doing with ICE to give a balance with the city government.
Thank you. Yida Ford, could you share your position?
Yeah, so I think we need to act in a way that's consistent with our identity as a sanctuary city. That's one perspective. And then the other is that, we're going to be making some serious decisions about the budget. And I think that, we have to find 600 million in savings to $1 billion in savings, right? And I think if, cutting our ties with ICE is saving us money, that's one of the areas that we need to look at, because again, we're navigating our way through this crisis and we will need to find savings somewhere. And that's one of the ways, obviously, since we are a sanctuary city and we've, part of our diversity and our local economy is largely through the immigrant community. So I'm wholeheartedly support it, and particularly from a fiscal standpoint as well.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask all of you a question that someone in the audience put in the chat, which is, what role does childhood PTSD play in the crime rate and educational gap in Ward 8, and what would you do to address it? I'll start with you, Stuart Anderson.
Okay, so post-traumatic distress and trauma, all of that plays a heavy role in the child's development. We've learned one of the things as an early childhood practitioner, working with something called CCAP, social, emotional, and academic success for children and their parents. I'm studying this thing on a regular and daily basis. And so I've been looking at the birth to 3 to 5 by 5, and this is where we came up with the CCAP model that we're trying to implement here specifically, predominantly in Ward 8. And the key to it is that it plays such a role because children learn so much between those first formative years that they just refine after ages 8. So it's important for us to be able to come up with ways to address the post-traumatic trauma. And that's something that's going to be a part of my agenda as I move forward as the next council member for Ward 8 specifically, because we have the largest amount of children exposed to the greatest amount of trauma.
Thank you. Mike Austin, your answer.
The trauma that our children see pretty regularly is devastating. From fights to drug abuse to actual abuse in the home. It absolutely shapes who they are and who they become as they grow into adults. And so we need a strong and heavier approach, one that uses trauma-informed resources, working with local partners who can provide or trauma trained, not just a general approach to it, but actually understand our trauma, that represent our community, understand our community, the trauma that our children face, to then help us heal. Because there's a stigma in the Black community that we don't need wraparound support, we don't need mental health services, we don't need to address these issues, and they shape why we make so many decisions. And so mental health support, especially for our young people, would be a top priority for me, and definitely something I'm going to push for, because with all these budget cuts we've had in our education system, especially where in schools, wraparound support services have been cut.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. I am one of those young people that's been a child who experienced PTSD, seeing someone get killed at the age of 11 years old, and seeing that time and time again as I grow into an adult. As they say, hurt people hurt people. And so one of the things I've been very integral in doing is getting the NERAC funded. That's a public health approach to dealing with trauma and violence in our community. And I still think that we as a government haven't gone far enough. I also introduced a bill to provide wraparound services and mentoring for highest risk kids in the community. When I got on the council, there was $0 in the budget for crime prevention and wraparound services as relates to youth violence and crime. And now we up to $12 million, moving towards $16 million in this new budget cycle. And so that's the type of leadership I bring to the table, because I know it firsthand. I live it. I buried 154 people in my 35 years here on this earth, and a lot of it started in my childhood. So I continue to stay on the front line and advocate for those like myself in our community.
Thank you, Councilmember. Ms. Ford.
Yeah, so, to your question about our children and childhood trauma, it's PTSD, but I call it perpetual stress. Our kids are constantly exposed to trauma on various levels, and the end result is that they can't learn. And right now, the schools in Ward 7 and 8 are underfunded. There's not enough money in the budget to support the trauma informed approach that everybody talks about. It's not there to have been implemented. So we need more funding for social workers. We need more funding for psychiatrists. There are schools that have literally 400, 600 kids and one full-time psychiatrist and one full-time social worker. That's just not adequate. And the funding hasn't been there. So as a council member, I would advocate for more funding so that our teachers can actually create a thriving environment for our students and feel and have the necessary training that they need, like tattoo, which is one form of therapeutic aggression control techniques. And their teachers literally being subject to violence, and they haven't been trained on these. And tattoo's not new, but I've represented some teachers who've been subject.
I'm sorry we had to mute you because you were over time. So the next question is going to be a quick show of hands again that everybody will answer. And that is, do you support the Second Look Amendment Act, which expands the opportunity to request resentencing for young adults who committed their offense between the ages of 18 and 25? Raise your hand now if you support this.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. Can you real quick? I apologize. I'm sorry, everybody. I think
it's okay. The question was, do you support the Second Look Amendment Act, which expands the opportunity to request resentencing for young adults who committed their offense between the ages of 18 and 25? Raise your hand if you support it. Okay, it looks like everybody supports it. Does anybody not support it? Mike Austin, could you explain your position?
Why I support it? Absolutely. When I was a legislative director in 2015, we had a similar bill, but it focused on the Youth Act. And so, we know that, children make childish decisions at times, and oftentimes the brain isn't fully developed until, later years. And so it's hard to think that a child can, make a life-changing, life-altering decision. Sometimes, although it devastates some families. And so definitely think that after serving time, that often these young people learn their lessons, and they deserve a second chance to re-enter society and not spend the rest of their lives behind bars. So I am in full support of it, and ensuring that it has a real approach to making sure our young people get back home and can be productive members of society.
Thank you. Stuart Anderson?
Yes. So I support the Second Look Amendment Act for a number of reasons. And it starts with the failed war on drugs. And then it continues with the Get Tough policies that followed for over 30 years. Most of the young people who are caught up in the criminal justice system has gotten there because of the PTSD that they've gone through. And having not had a chance to really fully develop, by the time they get there, we're creatures of habit. And so until we are put in environments where we can learn more conducive habits, we're gonna make mistakes. And some of those mistakes have landed some people inside these facilities. And I think that we should always go back and look at people and give people an opportunity to make the corrections in their life that they need. But they need help to make those corrections. And I think that when we see that, we should reward it.
Thank you. This next question will go to all of you, and it's about budget cuts. This economic crisis from the coronavirus pandemic is going to force $600 million in cuts from this year's budget. As council member, what would you propose to absolutely keep, and what would you propose that you would be willing to cut? Yaida Ford.
Unmuting myself. Thank you. So I definitely would consider looking at this surveillance camera rebate program. I mean, giving out money for people to potentially compromise their civil liberties and not knowing if it's an effective deterrent for crime would be one of the first areas I would look at for cutting. And then looking at ways to trim the fat and procurement and just some of the other areas. As a business owner, the last place I look is personnel. It's the hiring freezes and other things. Before I got there, I would want to look at some of the areas where we could trim the fat, and the programs I'd want to protect. Definitely human services, because Ward 8 residents already rely on those services, and they'll need them even more because of the number of employees that have suffered job losses in the service economy and all of that. They will need those services, so I'd want to protect that, birth to 3, and support for small business owners. I would want to protect.
Thank you. Councilmember Trayon White, what would you absolutely keep, and what would you be willing to cut?
Thank you. One of the things that's been tough during the season is trying to figure out what the budget will look like. I communicate very regularly with the chief financial officer, because just a couple of months ago, we were tooting that we were the strongest city financially in America, 15.5 billion with excess money coming in every year. And now that narrative is different. One of the things that I've been laser focused on is making sure we have a quality education, because if we don't have that, we can't build a strong community all throughout the city. Another thing we are laser focused on is healthcare, because during this crisis, there are a number of people who are experiencing a lot of health crises, especially in the Black and brown community. It's been exacerbated with this new COVID-19 that's crippled our community. Human services. We are in a place and time where we spend more money on buildings than we do on our own people. And so that narrative has to change in the city. And so those are some of the things I'll be really focused on keeping in the budget in my fight to advocate for Ward 8 in the city budget coming up. And housing is another priority for me in this budget.
Thank you. Mike Austin, what would you absolutely keep, and what would be the first things you would cut?
So we would absolutely try to keep our education, Ward 8 schools. They can't take any more cuts. I mean, they were taking cuts before Corona, so they can't take any cuts. Our human services, they're too essential, so we cannot cut those. Mental health support, we need that. It's vital for our community. So, I mean, those are just some key things that, and then, I think just violence prevention and our police force. I mean, I know this is, ACLU event, but, we do have to be able to respond when we do have some of these crises. So, I don't think we can take any huge budget cuts there. I would absolutely think maybe we could, it's a good question. I would say that the one thing we might have to cut are some development. I don't want to take huge cuts, because they are job creators and the unemployment rate is still the highest in the city. Maybe some of the development deals can take some cuts temporarily while we figure these things out.
Stuart Anderson, what would you absolutely keep, and what are the first things you would look to cut?
Okay, so this COVID virus has really kind of messed up my vision and my view, because I was looking to try to find cuts in the budget to put 200 million into the housing trust fund. So automatically, I'm talking about keeping the housing trust fund budget. Definitely healthcare. And when I look at healthcare, I kind of throw the violence intervention stuff in there and I try to, and I tend to put the trauma-informed care under that health umbrella. So definitely we're going to keep the funding for healthcare, if not increasing that. Then human services is definitely got to be in place. And I think that things that we begin to start looking at is we start looking at chipping away a quarter meal here, a quarter meal there, a quarter meal here through some of the other services. Being an advocate for the environment, I do some cutting there, I do some cutting in transportation, I do something with the overhead in education, because we can get 100 million from right there.
Thank you. Okay, this is the last question before closing statements. The NEAR Act included measures to increase accountability and transparency of police practices in DC, including mandating data on stop and frisk and use of force. But community concerns about police accountability still persist in Ward 8. So what measures would you support as a council member to increase police accountability? Ms. Ford.
So I would definitely encourage, I hope I'm unmuted and you can hear me. I would encourage, again, a community-based approach to policing, to improve the relationships between the community and the police. I mean, obviously that's a primary complaint. Also, I will look at recruitment methods for MPD and where they're getting and hiring, where these officers are coming from. I mean, there's been an issue that, you know, more and more officers look less and less like Ward 8 as we see them on the street. I mean, you know, first responders are coming and responding to different things where I live, and I see no officers of color. So we want to encourage, I would encourage partnerships between MPD and DC Public Schools so that they can recruit from our communities, so that we have more people policing our communities who are from our communities and look like us. And that would be one of the things. And then advocate for full, you know, full implementation of the NEAR Act would be nice as well. I think that would help as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. So I was the one who introduced the criminalization of fare evasion bill. I also co-sponsored the Access to Body-worn Camera Footage Amendment Act of 2019. But I also want to expand close family members and their counsel access to their lawyers. I think that we have to do more, especially in our community. We've seen too many videos going viral in the District of Columbia where police have been excessive in the community, abused their power. I'm one who has been a victim of it. Actually, Johnny Bonds, who was at the ACU at the time, helped represent me in one of my cases. And so I've seen it firsthand. I think we as a council can do more. I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, but I'll be pressing very hard to Chairman Phil Mendelson to get on the Judiciary Committee to ensure that I'm hands-on when it comes to oversight with the Metropolitan Police Department and other law enforcement in the District of Columbia.
Thank you. We are coming to a close with our time here. So the last thing is just a closing statement from each of you, which is why should Ward 8 voters vote for you? We'll start with Stuart Anderson.
Can I address that question? I'm so sorry. I don't know if it's out of turn.
Very briefly, if you had something to say, you can say it.
Yeah, I would really push to strengthen their app, you know, with the data collection pieces and the missing components. But I'm sorry, I don't want to be out of turn, but I definitely want to push for that, and it's kind of getting lost in the conversation a lot of times.
Okay, and Stuart Anderson, I'll give you also an opportunity to briefly respond to the question about police accountability before we move to closing statements.
Okay, so basically, for the last 2.5 years, I've been trying to address police accountability on a regular basis. I started with Reverend Motley, something that's called First Friday Breakfasts, where we try to sit down with MPD and make sure that we share with MPD and other individuals involved in the violence intervention community, the workers, the people doing the service. And so we've been actively working on these relationships because that's first and foremost. And the one thing that I will echo is that we need to try to figure out how do we get more of the officers living in the community? Because even I myself may be out of character at a moment. And if the officer lives 4 or 5 doors down from me and he sees me and he's got to figure, say, oh, something's going wrong. So we got to have community policing that has police officers that live in our community. We got to figure out how to do that and create some transparency. That's that on that.
Thank you. Okay, Mike Austin, I'll give you some more seconds to fully respond to the question now.
Sorry about that. You know, so the NEAR Act, you know, it is so the data collection piece is so important. And really using that approach to analyze our stop and frisk data and ensuring that the police are really held accountable would really be an important piece that I know is in the original intent of it, but it's been chopped up for whatever political reasons. But I really think that that data-driven approach would be important for us to really understand fully, why the NEAR Act, or how effective it really could be. And to Stuart's point, I think that having more local officers would be important. We don't have enough officers that are Ward 8 residents that live here, understand the community, or that take the sensitivity training sometimes. I know they tout it, but make sure that it's robust and they understand our community, and it's not a them and us type of situation.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to do 30-second closing statements because we're running out of time. I'll start with you, Councilmember White. 30 seconds. Why should Ward 8 voters vote for you?
My name is Treyon White, and I am the most qualified person to be the candidate or the elector for Ward 8. I'm the only one that ever had the job. I have used my platform to address all of the inequities in Ward 8 through the budget or through a bill. When you talk about violence, food access, education inequalities, health disparities, housing inequities, you can look it up. It's public record. I've introduced bills, got money for it, and we just beginning. That's why I'm running for re-election, to ensure that I don't stop here. I get your support from those residents in the ward, and also push our colleagues on the city council to join me in pushing these narratives and our budget items in the budget.
All right, Stuart Anderson, thank you.
I believe that I am the best candidate to lead Ward 8 because I have been actively involved in many of the things that even the council member has been involved in. I've supported many of those efforts. I believe that I can champion the social justice stuff that needs to actually happen because I've been on both sides of that apparatus. I believe that I am as qualified as anyone else to be the council member, in that I have a legal assistance degree, in that I have a social urban studies degree, which is basic city management. So that's why I should be the next candidate for Ward 8.
Thank you. Ms. Ford, 30 seconds.
Thank you. This legislation is nothing unless it's effective. You can pass legislation all day, and unless we see the tangible benefits in Ward 8, it has no effect in Ward 8. So it's one thing to say you're about inequity. It's another thing to roll up your sleeves and go against the grain of politics and advocate for a full service hospital. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've represented more than 350 people in the District of Columbia in the last few years alone. So I know what it's like to fight uphill battles. I'm the most qualified. I represented the most individuals who've experienced discrimination and all the things that ail our residents. So that's why voters should vote for me.
Mike Austin, 30 seconds.
Ward 8 is in dire need of leadership, and that's reality. We need someone who has the experience working at the council, someone who's had the experience writing policies. We haven't had our policies addressed at all, right? None of our concerns have been addressed at all. These marginal and incremental improvements are moving way too slow for me and for thousands of Ward 8 residents. It is time for someone who has the background, a long-time Washingtonian, an attorney, and someone who can get in there right now and address these concerns. I'm tired of waiting. Thousands of residents are tired of waiting. I'm ready to go. That's where we're the best one, we're the most qualified, and we're going to win on June 2nd.
Thank you. I will now hand it off to Monica Hopkins from the ACLU to close.
Thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you to the Ward 7 candidates. Thank you to the Ward 8 candidates. And a special thanks to Jenny Gaithright for moderating tonight's forum. It truly was a marathon. We will be sending all of the candidates questionnaires about these issues in the coming weeks, and their answers will be posted on our website, acludc.org. And if you haven't already, please remember to request an absentee ballot for the June 2nd primary. And you can do that by going to dcboe.org. Thanks again to the candidates and everyone in the audience for joining us. We hope you have a safe and wonderful evening.